Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, good evening, and thank you so much for joining me this evening on In Review, where we look at the big news, the top news, the views and news of our choice. And it's the Thursday, the 13th of the 5th of May, heading on into June, July, August, September. Bang. Well, the week has been always interesting, as we know. Very interesting events all over the world. But of course, we cannot tap into everything. You got what's happening in Gaza. You see the government is talking about leveling up. I even saw the Queen. The Queen even said leveling up. Everybody's talking about leveling up. I was trying to find a song about level up, level up, level up. But if I dare play that song, what is going to happen is I'm going to get copyright infringement. David Cameron is on the docks and many other things. But the most important thing, though, is COVID. And one of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight is how we are going to be looking at COVID. Many people are going to go back to work or so. And at the same time, with the strain on what is happening in India, will it have an impact on the UK? But without further ado, I'm going to bring in my guest this evening and get going. And I'll wait for David to come in. Hey, Anthony, and how are you, Siobhan? Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Hey, good to see you, Siobhan. How you doing?
Awesome. Siobhan?
Hi, good to see you guys.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, Siobhan is not new. She's a friend of this program, and she's, very intriguing person that I wanted to come onto the program today. And why is because she's a global regulatory and trade counsel, and also by chance, she's just a member of the Conservative Party. And one of the reasons why, and maybe next week I'll bring in a member of the Labour Party. And maybe after a week, I'll get another person of the Lib Dem and go all the way down. But, in light of we just came out of the UK elections just of recent days. And we said, what is the electorate saying? And of course, it's the Labour Party now in decline. I just said, not that she's going to be the dominant factor here, but I believe it will sort of set the stage and hear what she says. Anthony, how are you doing? How was the week?
Not too bad, thank you, Siobhan. Got some family issues that I'm involved in, but I think like us all with the pandemic, those of us who have got elderly parents, it means that we have to also split our time between doing things like that and also our day-to-day stuff. So that's the sort of stuff that's been taking up my week this week.
Mm. And Siobhan, how are you?
I'm okay. I think I hate to say it, it's a strange time, isn't it? Because on one hand, there's so many things to be excited about. We're getting ever closer to being able to do things just like as if the pandemic didn't happen. But on the other hand, it's tiring. And I think there was a term that's been going around, languishing. We're now in this period of languishing. And I kind of feel it myself, like we've got through the really difficult times. It's exciting that the vaccine is being rolled out and it's, going to more and more people and it kind of looks like the end is in sight. But at the same time, it's sort of like used up all my reserves. And so there's very little left. But to complain is not, right. And so therefore I'm going to be like, no, it's great. It's fantastic. And I'm very excited to be here today.
I must say it's very interesting because now I'm trying to decide when I want to go on the road, because before it was all easy. You could drive at any time. Now you go, oh no, it's 5 o'clock. Oh, the traffic is going to be on the road. But at the same time, there's a sense of, wow, normal, getting, not that you want things to get back to normal, but for people to get back in life. And I think that is very interesting at this time. I mean, I've been able to have my haircut, which is natural, Anthony, Anthony, I've been trying to get a haircut for the longest time,
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more ahead of you, Siobhan. At least I can actually still get my hair cut. But in terms of what you were saying there, Siobhan, regarding the languishing situation and just getting back into the swing of things, I think you're right. I mean, it's almost as if we've been, dare I say, we've not sleeping, but we've been sort of held back, and gradually now we're trying to get back into a routine again, which we've been missing for so long. And even though we like to socialize, we want to get out there, we've got to almost do it in a sense of, okay, well, I'll gradually, slowly but surely get back into the things I used to do. You can't just go from zero to hero overnight.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, before we go any further, I mean, David is trying to come in. He sent me a message a while ago, and the message, I'll make it very clear here. I think I have a virus on the system and there. But we just came out of the election, ladies and gentlemen, and for people, thank you for coming on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. We just came out of this election, and I think the last time, Anthony, we were here, it was on the night of the election, so there's no way we would have known the results. The results were coming in, and it was pointing towards a sort of conservative majority or victory. What, in light of where we are now, what I think the best question is, what do you think the electorate actually is saying? What do you think the electorate is saying with this election? Yes.
Well, I think there are two things that I've taken away from this election, and I think the first one is the importance or the growing influence of the personality politician, because clearly, Boris has had some issues recently which have come to light, which are well documented now, but his popularity still seems to be unaffected, and I think it shows that the personality element that Boris has in being able to sort of just take these things on the shoulder and just sort of carry on. People seem to actually admire that because he has a personality, he has a character, and he seems to say what he thinks, and he actually does appear to be getting things done. Whereas his compatriot in terms of Steer Karma, he seems to be, even though his background as a barrister is very good, but he comes across as a barrister, so therefore he comes across a little bit lifeless, a little bit stiff, and I don't think people have warmed to him. And I think as a consequence, they can't really relate to him. So I think there's a personality issue. But then also I think that the politics that we're now seeing is becoming so centre ground that it's very difficult to differentiate what Labour stands for in terms of their core voters anymore, because they all seem to be moving to the same space, which at the moment the Conservatives seem to be dominating. And I think that's the reason why in Hartlepool and places like that where Labour have held it for so long, they saw it turn blue. And I think it just shows now the way that politics has changed, and the way that the electorate themselves are now voting on things that are far more important to them rather than the party lines that we had before.
Siobhan, what's your take on that? Because we just had the major general election of recent days, where the electorate in key areas loan, in a sense, their vote to the Prime Minister. And the Brexit is out of the way. You have also UKIP and those guys are out of the way. Are we seeing some of that electorate votes pointing towards a Conservative? Or in a sense, at the same time, the question, what do you think the electorate is actually saying at this time?
So I think from an overarching perspective, when we look at the elections in Scotland, in Wales, and all the locals in England as well, what you can really see is that the incumbents all did well, or well enough to be returned as either the major parties or as kind of they got a bounce. And that really is, I think, because of, going back to what we said at the beginning, because we've been in this pandemic and we look like we're getting towards the end of it. And there has been some really good news stories in the last few months, things that, credit where it is due,
yes,
goes to the incumbents. I mean, a bit less in Scotland, but, definitely true in Wales and in England with the rollout of the vaccines, for example, and kind of, looking towards lifting restrictions. And so that kind of tells one side of the story of what the electorate is saying, is that, well done. And so we will give you our vote again. But also, I think the other thing with, in particular, Hartlepool is very clear is that people are looking for something fresher, something changed, something that gives them also hope as well. And regardless of how anyone may feel about the Prime Minister, about some of the things that have come to light in the media and what the Twitter sphere has to say, the truth of the matter is that Boris Johnson does make you feel quite good. You do have that trust in the hope of Britain going forward. And just as people lent the vote then in 2019, they are continuing to do so now. And he has, him and that front bench team have really cemented that with the win in Hartlepool.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Welcome, Dr. Burton. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I hope you can see me.
We can see you this time.
That's interesting.
You said you had a virus that tried to attach itself to your computer earlier.
Yeah, I'm going to have to send you a screenshot of what I can see, which is my reverse camera. But anyway, I digress.
David, welcome to this week. And what we're talking about now, I guess you may have seen it and you know the sort of area we're going, is what do you think the electorate is actually saying? Siobhan gave an idea, Anthony gave a perspective. But what do you think now that we have passed the election? And I tell you guys, it's so interesting. It was difficult to find things on the election even just now because so many things have gone on since the election, and it's very interesting. But David, what's your perspective, sir?
Yeah, I think in regards to these kind of elections do give us an insight into what the nation's feeling at this moment in time. But it's not a general election, and I think there's a long way off from a general election as well. And I think what it really showed me is the investment in regards to how the Labour Party are going about things at the moment in time. I don't think that they invested a lot of effort in these council elections, and I think for that reason they are where they are. Granted, I think the Conservatives probably didn't push their agenda very much either, and I think the other thing to just obviously speak on is the direction of the Labour Party, and I think we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But if you don't have a direction, or the direction is a bit questionable, then you're going to have the electorate decide to vote in the way and the manner that they have. So for me, it's about investment in time from the Labour Party. It's about the investment of the electorate in regards to the policies that stand for today. And what happens in the future as well in regards to how the Labour Party position themselves.
Yes.
What was their overarching position? And we've heard recently about ex-leaders of Labour coming out and questioning the direction. And I think that's key and essential to how things will materialise for the general election at least. But I don't really think that the council elections have said very much about where we are right now as in terms of our politics.
Isn't it fair to say that after 11 years in power, that's what I believe is a Conservative, that we're seeing a signal still towards a Conservative, because David, at the end of the day, the figures pointed towards, if we're going to say a Conservative victory, even though they said if it is translated into a general election, the Conservative would have lost 40 seats. Am I correct, Siobhan, there?
I think that was one of the things the BBC said.
Or you're just saying that people are just happy with the status quo. Nothing's really changed for people, and so I think that's what you're really looking at. Now, as I said, I think if there was, this is my humble opinion, I think if there was much more strong, effective leadership from the Conservative Party, of the Labour Party, if they position themselves in a way that would be more centrist, I think if they position themselves in that particular manner, they may well lend themselves to having a much more of a vote. And I just don't know that people truly are able to understand what it is that they stand for.
Yes.
I think the historic kind of 5 years with Jeremy Corbyn is still muddying the water for them in as far as their direction. You can still see that people are pulling in different directions within the party itself.
Yeah.
It's a party that is really fighting in and amongst itself, rather than having a battle with the Conservatives. So I think that's how I see things. I don't know that Conservatives have had to do very much, honestly. You can see that there's been a few bits of backlash for Boris in the past few weeks, but it's not really affected him, because I think the opposition hasn't really lent itself to giving that kind of viewpoint that we've got a party that can battle the Conservatives. So I don't think the Conservatives have done very much, if I'm being honest, in the past sort of few years or so. And I don't think that Boris has done himself very much favours in the eyes of people. There are certain things that have happened that have been in the positive. So, quite obviously, the vaccination The ability to procure all those vaccinations has been fantastic. And I'm not knocking Boris here, but what I'm saying is I think people have happily accepted the status quo. And it will be interesting to see, with a stronger, effective leadership from Labour, what happens with general elections that will be in the next few years.
Well, I move quickly over to Anthony, and the big question is the Labour Party now in somewhat of a permanent decline? It's unfortunate that there's not a Labour person here, but nevertheless, is the Labour Party now in permanent decline? What's your take on that from a project management perspective, Anthony?
Well, not just from a project management, but I think if I just sort of concur what David and what Siobhan have already said, I think clearly there is no vision. You know, with any sort of leadership, with any sort of project, you want to know where you're going, and you know that the Labour Party's got to have a project vision to sort of say, well, how are we taking the electorate with us? And at the moment, as David has already said and has been mentioned in the media, and even I think Keir Starmer has said, we need to communicate, or the Labour Party, should I say, needs to communicate that vision more effectively, because at the moment, no one really seems to understand what their position is and the way that they're going to get there. So without them having a very clear vision and without them being able to articulate what that means in practice on the ground to the Labour core voters and those who actually may want to vote Labour, that's where I feel the problem is for them at the moment. They as you mentioned with Jeremy Corbyn, there's at least with Jeremy Corbyn, you knew where he stood, you knew what his policies were. He was passionate about them, and he articulated them whenever he had the opportunity to do so. I think what Sir Keir Starmer can learn from that is to also make sure that he has a very clear vision, he articulates it, and everyone stands behind him. And I think the problem right now is there's no clear visions, and everybody's going in different directions, and the electorate don't know anything about them, so therefore they haven't voted. I mean, I think I even heard the other day that someone, when they were asked who was the shadow chancellor, he had to Google them because he didn't even know who that person was. And I think that highlights the fact that people don't really know who's in the Labour Party or what they stand for right now.
Well, the shadow person has gone now, and I don't even know who it is, because I think they did a reshuffle a while ago. So I'm in the same boat as well. I don't know if David, or Siobhan, the shadow chancellor is?
Rachel Reeves.
Correct.
Okay, there we go. Siobhan, as a member of the Conservative Party, what's your take on, is the Labour Party now in permanent decline?
Well, first of all, I hope not, because you always need a good opposition, a strong opposition, to be an effective government, to be held to account, not just internally, but also, within the whole process. So I really do hope that they aren't. But what is very clear is they need to get their house in order sharpish. It happens to every party. The Conservatives have been through it a few times in the past. So it's not like, that this is unresolvable. It's not like it's something new that no one has ever seen before. But of course, they are wrestling with the fact that they went in a particular direction with Corbyn and the whole Corbynite momentum, etc. movement. It didn't work, but rather than doing what Conservatives do, which is pull the plug when it doesn't work the first time, they continued and carried on with that. And that's really kind of, I guess, what's delayed the process that I presume they're going through now, which is sort of that internal navel gazing, he said, she said, whatever it may be. And they've been doing that at a time when I think they probably haven't also been able to go to their usual touch points in terms of policy or positions, because quite frankly, the Conservatives have been smart and then just swept all of that up in this last year. Things like the furlough schemes, which was a brand new initiative that was set up, by Rishi et al., all of the support that has been given, all of the ways in which we've all kind of been in it together for this last year and a bit, really has sort of taken and stolen Labour's thunder in those kinds of areas. And quite frankly, for much of the last year, I don't think that the majority of the population wanted to hear, you know, our main opposition party just slagging off the government and not actually being supportive of the various legislation that needed to get through the House in order to make this whole pandemic process, for want of another word, as good as it could have been, you know. So it's not been an easy time for Keir Starmer, I would say, looking at it from the outside. But what is very clear is they need to ensure that they get better comms team, because they could have had some easy wins at some times and they just fell flat from a communications perspective. They really need to sort of have a proper spring clean internally and work out what they are going to do, where they are going to go, and what lines they're going to take with the realities of what this Conservative government is and what it's doing.
It's interesting what you said, and I believe somebody said it earlier, that it is very important that there's an effective opposition, even though somebody and persons might want to say that, well, let them disappear, but an effective opposition is crucial in any stage, and any responsible politician would want an effective, opposition. But the big question now is level up in the UK possible? Because I was hearing this word leveling up for a while, and all I could think about was that song, Level Up, Level Up, Level Up. Even the Queen is talking about level up. Who can break down what is level up? Anthony, what is level up? What is leveling up in the UK?
Well, I think in terms of how the Conservatives have presented it, they want to provide the opportunity whereby the other parts of the country also get the same opportunities as what people tend to feel in London are the things we take for granted. So, you know, they want the same internet and broadband. They want the same work opportunities. They want the same initiatives and innovative activities to take place in their localities. That, you know, the jobs that have been lost through industries that have fallen by the wayside, they want there to be investment so that people can find new jobs, so that they can have their communities rebuilt. So in terms of the levelling up, they want those things that, you know, I suppose we would normally take for granted in London in terms of opportunities, on London-centric, should I say, to be provided to all parts of the country, so that they don't feel as they're being left behind by the London-centric dominated situation. And I think where the levelling up comes is really to make sure that all parts of the UK actually benefit from the same resources, the same amount of investment and innovation that perhaps some people feel is only taking place in London.
David, what's your take? What's your take on this whole level up thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. There's always been this kind of London-centric viewpoint on things, and you know, just going back a little step, you know, we've been talking about the politics of the Labour Party. Can't forget that obviously Welsh Labour have done very well in that part of the world. So you know, they've pulled in more than half the seats in their particular region of 60 seats, so 30 seats going to Labour. So, you know, there is this idea that, you know, in terms of levelling up, a lot of the focus, when you dampen it down, it's London. So yeah, there's that fairness of that, you know, up north shouldn't be forgotten about. Outside the M25, there is life outside the M25. And obviously the Conservatives did very well in sort of getting some of the votes in that regard when Boris came around the first time around. So, you know, people are looking at that and thinking, okay, well, what sort of help can we get from the government? But also, I think that levelling up from that idea, it has to be regional. Regions really have to look after themselves and think about how they best serve the people and within their particular regions. And then, as well as regional, it's got to be person specific as well. How do you move from a particular point in society and make the best of a situation for your family, so that, you know, families can move up in that particular dynamic as well. And I think the word here is opportunity. It's about opportunity. If you're able to get that opportunity to do the things that you need to do to deliver for your family and push things forward, then I think that's what you need. And I think what we've found is that at least some of the things that are causing opposition to people being able to have that opportunity in my particular neck of the woods, one thing I would mention is the fishing issue. So I've got a lot of people who come into my clinics who are fishermen, who are having big problems, and fisherwomen who are having big problems, obviously navigating that because of the post-Brexit trade talks on fishing. And, you know, that's a big thing for them. So they're saying, well, actually, you know, we voted for Brexit, but we're not getting what we wanted. We're not getting that free access to do our trade within the British waters and beyond. So opportunity presents itself in different many ways, and we all want opportunity, and I think that's the big word. If we're able to afford that, then that's the big thing in terms of leveling up.
But one of the things in the Queen's speech, the Queen, when she outlined the government priorities for the year ahead, we talk about infrastructure and leveling up, product security, telecommunication infrastructure bill, subsidy control bill, procurement bill, 8 free ports to be set up in England, high-speed rail. Is the Queen's speech setting, because there are some very controversial things in the Queen's speech. We will talk about that, and that is things like taking away the Fixed Term Act, the fixed parliamentary date for elections. Siobhan, what's your take on this and the leveling up and with the Queen's speech? Is it that the underpinning of the leveling up?
I think the bills that were referred to in the Queen's speech in relation to levelling up really shows the government's intention, right? Exactly as David said, a big thing is kind of creating a more level playing field across the country. And one of the key things of that is, of course, infrastructure. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the railways, Transpennine route, I think it might be called, is one of those that really could do with more investment. As an example, so that it actually is easier to travel across east-west in the northern parts of the country, for example, than it is currently. Because on the whole, our rail infrastructure, in terms of the investment that's been made over the last few decades, has been about getting in and out of London, more so than it is about being able to cross various parts of the country. So that's like an easy example from my own kind of basic knowledge of why it is so important to ensure that there are specific regional county to county kind of investments across infrastructure, whether it is things to do with transport or it's also the infrastructure for future industry and manufacturing. So a big thing that I know Andy Street has been really keen on, and Andy Street is the mayor of West Midlands, I think it is. And one of the things that he, is looking for is not just in terms of the investment for railways, high-speed railway, which is already in the works, but also things like gigafactories to go on in continuing that the Midlands is a heartland of automotive industry, not just in the UK, but also in the world. And as we are moving to a more electrified, greener environment, then that does require investment in a type of manufacturing infrastructure. And the same thing of free ports, like, for example, in the Tees Valley area, all of these regional investments are looking at ways in which that can actually promote those areas, to get that inward investment into them in order to create the foundations for levelling up, as the government says.
Okay, unless somebody want to say anything on that bit, Anthony or David, I want to just jump onto something else from the Queen's speech. So sorry, you're going to say something?
I think I agree. Broadly. No, just talking about. Oh God.
No, go ahead, David.
No, I was just agreeing with the sort of Transpennine sort of east to west route that's been discussed for many years through different parliaments, different governments. It's not a Labour thing, it's not a Conservative thing. I think it's just we need some action. I think that's the key. The action comes with more than just the words, and I do hope that there was a discussion. I would say really at the start of the Conservative of this northern powerhouse, and it's been a slow moving beast, I would say, and I think that
we're getting some glitches.
People have let that vote to Boris to see what happens.
Yeah.
Because obviously,
David, I don't know.
Very well.
Siobhan and Anthony, are you hearing some glitches
Under
from
the previous government?
Yeah, it's breaking up.
Yeah, David, you're breaking up a bit. Yeah, David.
He's now gone.
He's now gone. Okay. I just want to touch on these 3 points here. This solution and calling of Parliament bill will get rid of the fixed 5-year period between general elections. Plans to force voters in Great Britain to prove their identity when they were general election will be introduced. Judicial review bill will be set out. The government plan to change how decision can be challenged in courts. But let's deal with the 2 top ones there. Just a quick one before we touch on to COVID. Is it a backward step, Anthony, that getting rid of the fixed 5-year period between general elections?
Well, I think it's a very there was a phrase used a couple of years ago that a good time to release bad news, where someone wanted to sort of get things out without any sort of media scrutiny. And I think the fact that they've introduced this in the Queen's speech, not allowing the media really or to really focus on it in any detail, I do think it's a bit cheeky to sort of do that. I mean, personally, I think that the fixed term should remain, and I don't see what the benefit would be to not have it. It's a bit like, in a sense, you're sort of saying that, a party could go on and on and on. I think what maybe the Conservatives are perhaps thinking is, as what you mentioned right at the beginning, is Labour on the decline, and is the Conservative Party just going to run and run and run? But as Siobhan mentioned, this isn't the first time that we've had parties that have been in power for a long time. Labour did it under Tony Blair for 3 consecutive terms. So, but I do think that doing the taking away the opportunity of having a fixed term, I think is a wrong thing. I think there should be a fixed term because it allows people to know when an election is going to take place and what the next steps should be. So for me, I think there should have been a little bit more of a discussion around that rather than just simply bringing it in the way they have done.
Okay, and second one, before we could touch on to Siobhan and to hear her views on it, plans to force voters in Great Britain to prove their identity when they vote at general elections will be introduced in an electoral integrity bill. What's your take on that as well?
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
You don't agree with it at all? Okay.
I think there's no, to me, they're following in the States.
The States.
Where they are now introducing ID cards, and I believe where it's a slippery slope here. Once we go down this ID card route, I understand most people's details are already in various domains now anyway. And if you wanted to, most of our details are on an NI number and things like this. But I think going down the route of ID cards and general election, I think they're going down a slippery slope of actually we're all then going to have Big Brother knowing exactly what we're doing. And I don't think it's a good position to be in.
Siobhan, what's wrong with ID cards? For a person to provide ID cards to show that they are the ones who are actually voting. Or are you in support of it? What's your take on?
I'm quite 50-50 on it.
Yes.
To be honest. And so I don't have a firm position because on one hand, I do think every time I go to the polling station actually, and I have forgotten my card, which you don't do anyway, and you just give your address and I think your name, and that's it. And they're like, well, if they haven't put the ruler and the pencil through it, then you're good to go, and they hand it over to you. And so I think that in terms of potential, I don't want to say it's voter fraud because we all do it, and I have never fraudulently voted, and
we have all done it. We have all done it. So we.
So on one hand, I'm like, well, I think that's great because actually it means you can exercise your democratic right. I'm totally ignoring you.
Yeah.
Democratic right without having to think of, oh gosh, do I have my ID, don't I? And in particular, if we did go down the ID route, what it does is potentially actually disenfranchise many groups of people, those who unfortunately due to circumstances can't necessarily keep lots of information on them in various different ways. And so I think that from that perspective, there should be no need for ID cards, and actually voter fraud is normally related to postal voting, I believe. We have some good examples in Tower Hamlets of how that has happened in the past, as opposed to people turning up at a polling station. So is it necessary? Based on what I have seen so far, probably the answer is no. But on the other hand, does it kind of make sense? The answer is yes. If I was more libertarian, it would be very nice and easy. I would just turn around and say, absolutely no, we shouldn't have ID cards. And, it is true. Much of our data is about us is available somewhere and everywhere. But because it does have to be pieced together, I guess that gives us a bit more security in this day and age.
And if we just quickly touch on, before I go on to David, the dissolution and calling of a parliamentary bill, get rid of the fixed term period between your election. What's your take on that?
Quite frankly, I'm just not that bothered, because it's quite a new thing, the fixed term parliaments. That was one of the things from the coalition, in order to kind of give that the coalition the surety that it would actually last for 5 years.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, the maximum term is 5 years.
Yes.
I think one of the things they want to do is make it clear that it's 5 years from the first sitting, as opposed to, say, when the general election took place. But that's, a minor amount of time. And it has always kind of worked. And I feel in another way that actually the Fixed Term Parliament Act and that process actually hinders sometimes democracy, because if it ain't working, let them call an election and let's see what the voters have to say, as opposed to, a government actually having the authority to keep limping on all the way to the end of a 5-year period.
So David, don't you think it's okay then for any prime minister to just call an election at any time then, instead of waiting for 5 years, 4 years time? Leave it to them.
I think you can call it if there's exceptional circumstances before then, but I do like the Fixed Term Parliament Act. Sometimes you just need a little bit of a reset. You need to set that reset button and feel the pulse of the nation. I don't know that it's a bad thing to do that. And obviously you still could call an election before the 5 years is up anyway. No confidence, etc. Unless I'm mistaken, but that's my belief.
It's like what we had with Brexit recently.
Right. Exactly. So those certain things will exist if needs be. And in regards to the second point, I have no concerns with a voter ID card. I just think it makes perfect sense. As we talked about it, we mentioned previously, a lot of our data is already on the internet. A lot of our data is already out there. I'd have far more concerns about that than an ID card that would fall foul of us being watched, so to speak. So I don't think there's a particular issue in regards to. I don't think there's a big issue. Sorry, this is just a feeling. A big issue in regards to voter fraud, but that doesn't mean that they may not be. If you look at other countries and the way that there's been questions about the elections, say in the States, and the amount of propaganda that may well have been pushed up on people in order to get and facilitate people to get into power, it's not a long step along the shore to see that you could quite easily generate votes on behalf of somebody, particularly if we don't have IDs required for voting. So fraud could well be a potential issue. So why not correct that now by having the ability to produce cards that would allow you as a voter to have your vote and not have somebody else potentially clone your vote and use your vote. We've worked so hard to get to this particular position of being able to vote, and I think it would be very, very harsh if, in 10, 15, 20 years time, we still stay as we are, where you pitch up to a local elections voting station and somebody's taking your vote and there's not very much you can do about it because you can't prove your ID. So I don't have a problem with ID. We use ID for other things. If you want to buy booze and liquor, which I don't condone because I'm a doctor, but if you want to buy drinks, that's perfectly fine, be reasonable about it. But you have to produce ID if you don't look like you're overage. There's other things that we have to prove ID for. You've got a passport. If you've got the luxury to travel, and people are fortunate to travel, then fine. Use that to get on a plane or on a ship or on a boat, whatever. And I know that there's this worry that people may not have access to the driving license, for example, or people may feel disenfranchised. But I do generally think if you want the ability to vote, and we should all want the ability to vote, then a voting ID card should not be too much of a drop in the ocean for us all to sign up to.
Well, that's very interesting, because recently I bought a drainage blocker, to unblock the drain, and I went to Selco. I had to produce an ID card because the acid now, they're actually monitoring who buy acid because of the recent cases of people throwing.
Yeah.
So everybody's getting ID, you know. Well, anyway, well, I guess all I can say to people, ladies and gentlemen, hi, Michelle, how are you? Is that make sure you get your voters card in place, because it seems like we're going that way. But at the same time, with the majority that the government has, do you believe then, Anthony and Siobhan, that more than likely these bills will pass because the government has this majority at this moment?
Well, I think a simple answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think really and truly, what's more crucial probably is actually the time to be able to get all of these things through. This is a really ambitious agenda that the government has laid out in the Queen's speech, and getting a piece of legislation through the whole process, even a piece of legislation that pretty much everyone is on board with, takes a long time, and it can come and up to a number of roadblocks. So more so than kind of what will the final vote be, will it actually get through the process? Will it get bogged down in amendments or in select or whatever, I think is really the crucial thing. And that's probably a key classic example of that will be the voter ID.
Yes.
For sure.
Okay.
Because there are very strong opinions about it. And so if it does actually, go from the, I think, white paper stage and, the first bill and
the House of Lords.
I could see that stumbling many a time before anyone actually gets to vote on it.
And I guess many people will start to march and chant down Babylon one more time again, as they normally say. Let's move on quickly. The NHS COVID legacy. One of the things the news was talking a lot about was the long waits. I think they say millions apparently are waiting, and lives at risk. David, over to you. It's so funny, David. Over the past year, all our topics were starting off with COVID. And can you imagine, COVID is at the third level in this discussion, and it's a great feeling anyhow that COVID is not the top. But in light of the NHS COVID legacy, and you're in NHS, David, what's your take and what's the latest regarding these long waits? Millions, I understand.
Yeah, so I mean, whilst COVID has been the topic of discussion between us on this platform for many a month now, and it's quite exhaustive. I'm sure we've all got that COVID fatigue. I've been championing it a bit to say that, and I'm standing tested on record as saying that we can't just think about COVID and its direct consequences. We've got to think about the indirect consequences of COVID. And that leads nicely onto that topic of discussion, which is the other cares that have been unfortunately left behind. The other cares of cancer, for example, where there's been delays in diagnosis for patients coming up to and for diagnosis of treatment and treatment of cancer as well. So that's a big burden to try and fill that void now in terms of getting those patients into the system and effectively giving them treatments. And in my neck of woods, obviously with related to eye health, there's a large cataract waiting list that's affecting the nation now, and cataract is a reversible cause of sight loss for people. And you've got to think about the ability to do the tasks of daily living, so the things like driving, things like just getting out and about. Those things have been hampered by the fact that patients have not been able to go to their first caregiver, which would be the local optician, because they've been closed historically, and therefore them not being referred into the NHS for treatment. So those waiting lists now are compounded by the fact that we've not been able to operate on patients who have already been on the waiting list prior to COVID. It's been something that's been somewhat an afterthought. Part of me gets it, but the other part doesn't. The part of me that gets it is quite obviously, we were very worried about COVID, and we still are quite worried about COVID, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But at the same time, we should not lose sight of the other comorbidities that affect people. People are still going to unfortunately have heart attacks, strokes, pick up diabetes, those sort of things, those ailments that GPs would pick up, but they've been struggling to see patients as well. I think that's where I've had a bit of an issue in regards to our approach to this whole situation, and that now has a bigger bearing on the waiting list that we see now, because, well, the workforce, that's not going to sort of increase overnight. So what do? The workforce is already exhausted because of the COVID efforts. So what do? And I think there's lots of ideas in terms of getting patients onto waiting lists, for example, on weekend work. But that's already a pressure in itself, because your clinicians, nurses, the hospital staff that have to turnaround of cleaning the hospital environments and making sure that it's COVID safe, etc. They have to work tremendously hard already during the course of the week. So I think there's a big issue in regards to the way that we need to think about the work and that goes towards trying to make sure that other health conditions have been looked into, and that they've been allowed for in this particular pandemic. And I don't think it's been done to date to the best of our abilities.
You're on mute, Siobhan.
I was on mute. That was just testing to make sure that everybody's listening. Actually, Anthony, you're championing this petition. You're championing this petition to have a day to recognize healthcare workers. Yes. Yesterday there was Midwifery Day and Nurses Day, and what I'm coming to now is this point. COVID has left a toxic legacy for the NHS, with hospitals facing a huge backlog, putting lives at risk. Patient groups and staffs are warning. Nurses apparently have gotten this 1% wage or something like that increase. And we know that the nurses are going to be under pressure now. So just as they're coming over the pressure of COVID, they are getting into this other pressure now, because, hey, they are the backbone. I call them, they are the ones that get into the trench after the doctors walk around. Sorry, David. After the doctors walk around and the nurses carry on, right, David? Is that correct?
We're all in it together. It's a teamwork.
We're all in it together. But Anthony, what's your take on this now? This aspect of where we're at.
Well, with regards to the petition that I had put forward, which has had over 105,000 signatures for an NHS and Key Workers Day, the main priority was really to try and give the NHS and key workers a regular recognition of the work and sacrifice that they do. I mean, as many people have said, the nurses and key workers don't want claps. They want pay. They want recognition. They want appreciation. They want actually to be not just remembered when there are times of need like now, where we are so reliant upon them. They want people to really understand and maybe to simply recognize the great debt that we owe them. So the recent Nurse Day that was done, I think, again, things like that are good, but I think we need to have almost like a national holiday that really allows people to reflect, remember, and so that we don't take these individuals for granted. As David said, it's a team effort with all the people who work in the NHS. My other half also is part of the NHS and has been for the last 30 years or so. So, that's a significant contribution that she has made, and others like David and others have made to the NHS and the patients they look after. And I think, they need to be recognized and they need to be rewarded as such. So for me, anything that shines a spotlight on the work they do is important. Yeah. It just seems sad, though, that despite all of the efforts they put in this year, and as David has highlighted, the work continues in the background after COVID, that their pay is not reflected, and they probably will be forgotten in the sense of other issues that come on by. So my petition was to try and make sure there was a permanent a day that recognised the NHS contribution of those who work in it and the key workers who support them.
What's your take, Siobhan? Are you going to speak to the government to tell them to make sure the nurses are rewarded properly?
Oh, if only I had that kind of influence, right? I think
Rishi listen to this program, and somebody
Rishi does listen to your program. I think what is very clear, particularly if I think of those first few months of lockdown, is that all essential workers are essential and they do amazing things. And I'm using that phrase essential because there are many people who put themselves forward in terms of their jobs and with their interactions with the rest of us, mere mortals, getting in the way, and that has been especially true over this last year and a bit now. And they all need recognition, and also wherever possible pay increases.
Yeah.
But I am also very mindful of the fact that books need to be balanced, right? And so as much as I would love to say absolutely maximize a pay increase, I would never want to say how much that should be, because I'm not there in the Treasury. I don't know what we have available and what we don't. But, equally, we should be looking at ensuring that when we have whatever our pot of money is, that it is spent in the best possible ways. And one of those is recognising those people and paying them fairly for the roles that they take on for all of us, right? Because at the end of the day, I couldn't do the job of a nurse. I would be really bad at it, but I appreciate the fact that other people do, and they have that vocational side as well as the amazing skills that they have, and that has to be recognised. And so we have to do that. In the wider COVID legacy within the NHS,
yes.
I think that's one of those lessons, right, that hopefully the commission, when it eventually gets set up, will also look at, and how do we handle that balance between the protection overall for both the workers and the rest of the population, but also actually ensuring that things can carry on, because at the end of the day, we need our population to be fighting fit all the time. Without having a fighting fit population, we couldn't get through COVID, and therefore we have to be prepared for whatever comes next, and including just normal life. So hearing what David has to say, it definitely is a concern for me that now we are, 13, 14 months into this, that somehow overall that the NHS as the body corporate hasn't managed to find a way to kind of have parallel streams, or to be able to get a balance. That is a concern, because from everything I hear, from what Sage has got to say, or, looking at the next variant, wherever it may be, we are going to have to live with this virus and the impact of this virus for potentially quite a long time. And so therefore it is beholden on all of those who are decision makers to actually get on and find ways that we can operate effectively in this environment.
David,
can I just add very quickly, Siobhan, before you wrap up? There's a couple of things that Siobhan just mentioned there, which I just have to quickly just touch on. First of all, the government, and I'm all in favour of governments balancing books, but don't forget the government has been able to find a shed load of money for the furlough scheme. The government does actually pay a lot of money to defence, of which, if I'm not mistaken, the last World War was 40 odd years ago. So we spend a lot of money on nice bright ships and whatever, and bombs and missiles. What's the point of all that stuff, which we know is never going to be used? Nuclear weapons are never going to be used, right? So a lot of that money could actually go to areas like the NHS, where people who are actually who actually are doing the service now could benefit from it. So yes, I know it's important to balance books, but there is money, and the government, when it's necessary and when they want to, they can find it. I just don't think they have actually properly put forward a proper structure in terms of being able to fund the NHS and the care service properly. And I think that's been a real shame of the party so far, to come forward with something which is effective and actually is going to address the problems. Furlough, they managed to pull it out of the hat. Yes, full marks to them. But things like the defence, there's a hell of a lot of money that goes into that, and quite frankly, they could divert half of that, and it wouldn't bat an eyelid.
There's a prime minister in Jamaica, former prime minister named Portia Simpson. There was a hustings, and they asked her where did she found money from. She said she found the money. But she found money. David, listen, I'm going to wrap up on this point here quickly, but in light of the variant in the air, in light of India, and in light of the Prime Minister even questioning about the next level of, releasing, easing the lockdown, and in light of what we're talking about now regarding the balancing up with the long waits, Siobhan said something. There's still going to have to be some balance in that there, isn't it? Because you can't really move on in a way, just dealing with, you're going to still have that struggle, isn't it? David, you're on mute now, David. Sorry. You muted yourself, not me. Oh, no, yes, you're still muted. Hang on.
There we go. I'm back.
Okay. Yeah,
With technical difficulties all evening. No, I think that much like we've tried to do today, have a balanced discussion. You've got to have a balancing act. And yeah, you're right. I just don't think that there is very much of a balance. And it's difficult. I get it. You know, at the end of the day, we're trying to make decisions on future events. But, you know, we're not sure how things will develop. With respect to new variants, like I've said on this program several times, there's always going to be variants. What we've got now is a more effective way of battling that, because we've got vaccinations that are millionfold, you know, helping to battle this particular pandemic. So I don't see that we're in a worse scenario now than we were 13, 14 months ago, quite obviously. So, you know, we've got to move forward with positivity. I'm not saying blindfold ignorance of variation in the COVID-19 kind of structure, because we know that that's going to occur. But the fact is, we cannot sit on the back burner and not look at the other ailments of life, and not have the facilities for people to see caregivers in the community and then be referred on to hospital services. That cannot happen, because people then will be passing away through conditions that are treatable conditions. And cancers have become so much more treatable now than they have been at any point in time, quite obviously. And the more years that roll by, the more we'll be able to battle that. But we cannot be fearful of COVID-19 to the extent that we do, or ignore cancers, for example, to the extent that we are, and have people pass away and be away from loved ones. So that's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to create any fear here. I'm just saying that we've got to really realign the balance of being worried about the conditions that can be treated.
Good point. One last thing before we go, Anthony. Lockdown and work patterns. Are people going to go? Well, we talk about lockdown, but lockdown might not finish. But are people going back to work as normal? Is it back to work?
In a short word, I think the answer is yes. People want to get back to work. I think there's a push and a need for social contact again. And I think the economy will only pick up and benefit from people actually going back to the sort of work patterns they had before the pandemic.
Siobhan, ready to work? Back in work?
Well, always been working. Just, you mean ready to go into an office or whatever? I think absolutely what Anthony's saying, that, you know, people are really craving that kind of contact, even the people who they maybe didn't always appreciate in the office, they look forward to that. And so I think that provided employers are mindful of, you know, maybe some people's trepidation, that actually working from home has had some benefits, and if they can continue, again, going back to that balanced approach idea, then absolutely, you know, let's get out of our houses and let's get back into the office.
Yes. And David, finally?
I'm in the field of health. The work never stops.
What's that?
I'm in the field of health. The work never stops.
The work never stops.
The work never stops, and I'm hopeful that people will be able to get back to some sort of normality for their mental health and their mental well-being. We need to get back out, and we need to get people feeling comfortable again, to maneuver around the world as best that they can. Because, you know, life is short at the end of the day, and we need to enjoy it as best we can, as safely as we can.
And make sure that you walk and talk and get out there into nature, because they said it's Mental Awareness Week as well. People get out there. Fantastic. Listen, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining. Those on Instagram, chop on those guys, YouTube and Facebook. Thank you, Siobhan, for gracing us with your presence and being able to be that contact point, so the Prime Minister will get his hands and sort out some money for us. You know, David, as usual, thank you for giving us the update. And Mr. Truth Anthony, thank you for keeping us in the right pathway. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to like and subscribe to the Silburn Show. Thank you very much, and have a good night, and see you around next time on the ride. 1 second, let me just wrap up here now.